Hiya, teacher friends. Today, I'd like to give you a few pieces of advice regarding cancellations on iTalki. I'd like to talk to you from my personal experience. I want to give you my own stance, my own policy on cancellations. I'd like to talk to you about how my cancellation policy has actually changed over time and what this could mean for you as a prospective teacher or teacher on iTalki. So first of all, what are cancellations? Well, cancellations could be two things. They could be done more than 24 hours before the lesson starts. And in that case, the student is at their own free will. They could cancel a lesson and reprogram it or reschedule it for any other time that meets your schedule and their schedule. However, if they don't do this more than 24 hours before the start of the class, then technically that class is yours as a teacher. You have no liability to reimburse the student. It's completely your choice. So basically, after this class that never happens, you will get a form and you could explain the student didn't show up, or sometimes the teacher doesn't show up, right? And that's a problem as well, because that could hurt your score on iTalki, and that takes time away from the student. It could really hurt rapport with your students and hurt the confidence that they have in you. So I suggest that to the best of your ability, show up to class, obviously. Okay, so those are cancellations. When I first started on iTalki, I gave my students the benefit of the doubt. There were two reasons for this. Number one, I honestly felt bad because a lot of these, because my price was lower, a lot of my students, and I know this on a personal level, were also from a lower income, right? So losing out on these lessons, it was even more heartbreaking compared to some of the other students that I have taught since then. Yeah. And that's not to say that a person would throw away a lesson double or triple the price gladly, right? So this is not a generalization, but from my own experience and the conversations that I've had one-on-one with students, I've definitely seen this tendency that it was much harder, much more difficult to explain this to students a year and a half ago than it is now, right? The second reason for this was actually part of my strategy as a teacher. I mean, obviously, I want long-term students. I want to build rapport with students. I want students to come back. And the most common cancellations happened with new students. Yeah, trial lessons that never happened. And I've noticed that if I reimbursed the student for that lesson instead of claiming the money, then they would be more likely to actually book a package after and book 5 or 10 lessons, right? I don't know if that's because they enjoyed the class or partially out of feeling bad for not showing up to the first one. But there's no question it could help to build rapport. It could also damage rapport because, I mean, you know, as a teacher and a student, this is a professional relationship. And you could be teaching your students bad habits by allowing them. So some students do take advantage. And I'll tell you right now, I have taught students for dozens of lessons, and there are students who have never tried canceling a lesson within 24 hours, and there are students who have tried to do that dozens of times. So there are tendencies between different people, different personalities for this to happen. So over time, like, you know, in the spring last year, I wasn't all that busy anyway, but over time, coming into the fall, the autumn, hearing different testimonies from the YouTube community, people who watch my videos, and also just becoming busier in general with my studies at university, I realized that my time was just too precious to be throwing away money. And look, it's not just the fact that I'm forfeiting this class, because I mean, if a student cancels more than 24 hours beforehand, well, I used to see that as a bad thing. Oh, geez, I'm not going to be able to teach that class. I'm not going to be able to teach that student. That's a potential student right there. However, this could also free up a slot for another potential student who might want to book even more classes, who might want to learn even more intensively, and it might be a student that you just get on with better. And that's very important to teachers as well. So I think that there are two issues here. It's like the first one is that okay, that's my time. You wouldn't book a class with me in person and just not show up, and then expect me to reimburse you, right? Well, we should assume the same thing with iTalki teachers. I know it's online, so we could just assume, yeah, he could just go back to watching his Netflix or something. But realistically, we don't know what the iTalki teacher, what the teacher or the student are up to in their lives. That person could have canceled going to a wedding or something like that in order to teach you, right? And they could have rushed home from somewhere in the rain in order to be there on time for that class, and then you don't show up, right? And it goes both ways. It's just it's probably more important for the teacher to actually show up but it's a two-way street, right? So that's one prong, just the morals of it. But on the other hand, it is the fact that they are taking away time. This time isn't going to be dedicated to anything, to meeting another potential student, right? So those are two sides of the coin that I think could be that could put the teacher in a bad position. Yeah. So I tightened up on my policy in November, December. I started explaining to my students, hey, I can't be refunding every class. If it happens now, I'll give you a pass, but then it can happen again in the future. From there, I started to tighten up even more. In March and April, I just started saying, we could add some time on to future classes. We'll make up for it in the long run. That means in order for them to get their value for the lesson back, they really need to book more lessons in the future. Yeah. I think this is more than fair. I know technically, like, that's your time. They weren't there, so you have no obligation or responsibility to give any of that time back, right? But by saying this, we'll add 2 or 3 minutes on to future lessons when there is time, when I don't have another student right after, until maybe one day down the road it amounts to the 45-minute lesson that you just forfeited. That could, in the long run, actually give more incentive for your students to book lessons. It could get them to respect you more as a teacher, right? And we could do all of this without you forfeiting your precious time and money as well. Now, let's reverse this, because I have had emergencies where I haven't shown up to class. Yeah. And my students and I have sorted this out amongst ourselves. Luckily, it's never been a situation where we have put it down as the teacher didn't show up, because frankly that's never happened. But I have had to cancel a lesson within 24 hours, probably 2 or 3 lessons out of the 2,400 that I've taught. Basically, if you cancel a lesson with the student, then if the student does that vice versa, you should really give them a pass, right? That's what I think, at least, and that's what I've taken with my iTalki teachers as well. I've had a French teacher, a Spanish teacher who have canceled the day of. It was a one-off. It hasn't happened since. It never happened before then. And basically, the next time that I had to miss a class as a student, if it did happen, we sorted that out amongst ourselves, and there was a reimbursement given. Yeah. So I think you should treat your students the way that you would like to be treated. Yeah. But of course, a very important thing is to be consistent. Yeah, to be consistent with your students. I know we have to be compassionate. It's very important to be compassionate as teachers. But we are online for work, right? So find the policy that works for you. Maybe you are the person I was last year and you have a little bit more time in your schedule, and you have a little bit more wiggle room to be charitable with your time. Maybe you're very busy and you want to lay down the letter of the law, and you cannot budge at all to accommodate for missed lessons. Maybe there's a certain amount of time in advance. Like if they tell you more than 12 hours in advance, then it's okay. But it's not okay if it's 15 minutes in advance, for example. That's all up to you as teachers, right? But I would definitely suggest that you try to be flexible, at least while you're starting off on iTalki. Because as for me, it did help me to keep some students. And if you find down the line that some students are taking advantage of that, then definitely you could become more strict with this policy. Or even better, cement a policy right from the very get-go. Include it in your introductory manual. I've spoken about that before, how I have documents like a PDF file that I send to students that explains my course, my curriculum, and I actually explain the cancellation policy right there. So they just know right from the beginning. Other students put it in their profile. I avoid doing that because I don't want to start things off on a negative note. I don't want the first thing that they see to be no cancellations, right? Or no refunds, right? But I totally get it if you do that. Anyway, I hope that this helps you out with your iTalki journey. I hope that this saves you time and saves you money. I hope it gets you more students and allows you to keep your students. And if you have any questions at all, please just leave them down there in the box. I'll see you next time, and keep smiling.